And now for tonight's episode of Defendant Trump. Our next guest, Harvard constitutional law professor Laurence Tribe, wrote an op-ed in the Boston Globe today titled, "Capitol Police Have the Best Case Against Trump for the Insurrection." Professor Tribe compares the technical and evidentiary merits of the lawsuits filed last week by two Capitol Police officers directly against Donald Trump for the pain and suffering that they endured when the Trump mob attacked them and the Capitol on January 6th, to the lawsuits filed by two members of Congress against Donald Trump for inciting the insurrection. Professor Tribe finds that the police officers have a simpler case and an emotionally more powerful case, as described in their lawsuits. Quote, Officer Hemby was crushed against the doors on the east side, trying to hold the insurrectionists back. Over and over, he tried to tell the insurrectionists that the doors opened outward and that pressing him into the door would do no good. But the insurrectionists continued to scream, "Fight for Trump, stop the steal," and various other slogans as they struck him with their fists and whatever they had in their hands. Things were being thrown at him, and he was sprayed with chemicals that irritated his eyes, skin, and throat. A forceful surge of insurrectionists pushed forward and slammed Officer Blassingame against a stone column. He struck his spine and the back of his head and was unable to move. For the first time in his life, people were yelling into his face, calling him the N-word repeatedly and throughout the attack. He lost count of the many times the racial slur was hurled at him. He is haunted by the memory of being attacked and of the sensory impacts, the sights, sounds, smells, even tastes of the attack remain close to the surface. The Trump mob made it very clear for the juries in these cases who they were fighting for.
Take the Capitol! Take the Capitol! Take the Capitol! Take the Capitol! Take the Capitol right now!
Join us now, Laurence Tribe, University Professor of Constitutional Law Emeritus at Harvard Law School. He has won 35 cases in the United States Supreme Court. Professor Tribe, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I've been eager to get your analysis of these police officer lawsuits because they are of a kind of less legally complicated sort than what the members of Congress have filed. This seems like a much more traditional tort after an injury suffered because of someone else's reckless conduct.
Exactly. The lawsuits filed by the congressmen, including Representative Swalwell and Representative Thompson, are very strong. They rely on laws going back to the Civil War era, slightly complicated, insurrection, rebellion, not terms that juries are necessarily familiar with. And the question of whether members of Congress have what's called standing to file suits of that kind is going to be at least somewhat complicated. Here, it's very simple. Everybody knows about assault and battery. You don't even have to have gone to law school. What you've described is classic intentional torts, assault, battery, ramming people, spraying them with poisons and pepper spray, crushing them against the wall, all at the command and direction, these lawsuits plausibly allege, of the President of the United States, who was riling up this mob. So it is very clear that these officers were hurt. They were hurt as a result of the assault and battery incited by the president. And there's no question about their standing. There was it's kind of a strange tweet by some horrible person following the president saying that they don't have standing. In fact, they'll be lying in a pool of blood. The fact is that because they were bloodied and battered, they have obvious standing to claim that they were the victims of a presidentially directed assault and battery. These lawsuits also rely on some rather simple local DC, District of Columbia laws about fomenting a riot and causing mayhem. Very simple laws. And the basis of the lawsuit is that the officers are citizens of Maryland. Donald Trump is a citizen of Florida. It's what's called a diversity suit, the very earliest kind of jurisdiction that Congress created back in 1789. Very simple lawsuit, and the simplicity of it is part of its great strength.
And this lawsuit, this same lawsuit, is available to at least about 140 Capitol Police officers who were injured that day. They could file similar lawsuits, similar claims. Some of them would be assigned different dollar values by juries if they get to juries.
Right.
And so you could have just a bankrupting amount of these kinds of lawsuits being filed by Capitol Police officers alone.
Right, unless some of the Capitol Police officers happen to be citizens and residents of Florida, which I very much doubt, but all the others could file suits just like this. And they all seek not only compensation, though they don't glamorize it by saying that they're entitled to billions of dollars, but compensation for the harm plus punitive damages to punish the president for what he did and deter future presidents. So these are very standard lawsuits, and I can imagine that the emotional as well as legal appeal of these lawsuits to the garden variety DC jury would be pretty considerable. So I think that the president's attempt to escape accountability is going to be very uphill when you combine the lawsuits that are also strong brought by members of Congress with these suits. It's very hard to see how the president can avoid being held accountable. And I think that's good for the future of the country.
That with civil lawsuits like this, the challenge is getting them to the jury, getting them past all the procedural hurdles of dismissal and all of that. And it's very common in civil lawsuits that once you're past any dismissal hurdles, and it's very clear that your case is going to the jury, that the defendant then tries to make a settlement agreement to avoid the jury's own decision on this. And it would seem that a Washington, D.C. jury would be willing to exact an enormous price, possibly, from Donald Trump in a verdict like this.
I think that's right. And settlement talks are not going to get anywhere before discovery. Discovery will happen as soon as the attempts to toss these lawsuits out of the threshold fail. And that discovery means that a guy named Donald J. Trump will finally have to sit in a deposition and testify under oath, as well as others will have to testify. So I think that these lawsuits are really going somewhere, and I think that it's about time.
Professor Laurence Tribe, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. We always greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Laurence.
Thank you. And coming up, bandits. That's what one contributor is calling Donald Trump's fundraising operation that tricked him into allowing the Trump campaign, without his knowledge, to repeatedly withdraw money directly from his account. No one could be less surprised by this than Tim O'Brien, who has studied Donald Trump's financial operations for decades. Tim O'Brien joins us next.